On the morning of May 24th, 1941, the most powerful symbol of the British Empire was a single warship. For more than 20 years, she had been the largest warship in the entire world, a steel giant that had toured the globe to show every nation what British power looked like. Sailors did not just respect her, they believed in her. They called her the Mighty Hood, and an entire generation grew up certain that she was, for all practical purposes, unsinkable. That morning, she turned to fight the German battleship Bismarck in the cold waters near Iceland. The battle lasted only a few minutes. Then a shell from the Bismarck found something deep inside the hood, reached the magazines where her ammunition was stored, and set off an explosion so violent that it tore the enormous ship in half. The pride of the Royal Navy went to the bottom of the ocean in roughly 3 minutes. Of the 1,418 men aboard, only 3 survived. Over the next 15 minutes, we are going to look at the war machines that everyone swore could not be killed, and how fast reality proved them wrong. These were not forgotten failures. They were the most feared weapons of their age. The ones put on posters and printed in newspapers, the ones their enemies were taught to dread. And every single one of them was sunk, burned, abandoned, or humiliated, often before it could land a single meaningful blow. Some died in minutes. Some were destroyed by weapons far cheaper than themselves. And some never even made it into the fight they were built for. Stay with me, because the bigger the legend gets, the harder and the faster it falls. There is a word that appears again and again across military history, and it may be the most dangerous word a general or an engineer can ever say. The word is unkillable. Because the moment a machine is believed to be invincible, the people who build it and the people who command it stop preparing for the one thing that matters most, the possibility that it can be destroyed. They send it where they should not. They risk it when they should hold it back. And the enemy, meanwhile, is hard at work finding the single weakness that the legend was supposed to have erased. Nowhere is that pattern clearer than in the story of the ship that sank the Hood. Because within just 3 days, she would suffer almost the exact same fate. The Bismarck was the pride of the German Navy, the largest battleship Germany ever put to sea. And she was considered so well armored and so well built that she was effectively unsinkable. Sinking the Mighty Hood in a matter of minutes only confirmed everything Germany believed about her. But that victory had a cost. It made the Bismarck the most wanted ship in the world, and the Royal Navy threw everything it had into hunting her down. What finally doomed her was almost insulting. From the deck of a British carrier rose a swordfish, an old, slow biplane built of metal frame and fabric, the kind of aircraft that already looked like a relic from the previous war. One of those flimsy planes put a single torpedo into the Bismarck's stern and jammed her rudder, leaving the mighty battleship unable to steer, turning helpless circles in the open sea. The British fleet closed in and battered her with shell after shell until she went under. The unsinkable Bismarck sank on her very first mission, brought down by an aircraft that looked like it belonged in a museum. Around 2,000 men died with her. The sea was where these giants met their end most often, but it was not the only place. Decades earlier, in the skies over Britain, another supposedly untouchable weapon ruled without challenge. During the First World War, Germany sent enormous rigid airships, the famous Zeppelins, to bomb London and other cities. At first, they truly were almost impossible to stop. They flew higher than British fighter planes could climb, drifting over the rooftops in the dark and dropping bombs on a population that had no way to reach them. To the people below, these silent giants seemed like monsters that could attack at will and never be touched. And then that illusion died in a single night. British pilots were finally given a new kind of ammunition, incendiary rounds designed to set the airships on fire. Because the Zeppelins were filled with hydrogen, the most flammable gas imaginable, one burst of those rounds could turn the entire airship into a falling river of flame. When the first of these giants was shot down in flames over England in 1916, crowds watched it burn across the night sky. The crews aboard had no parachutes. The weapon that could not be touched had become a flying funeral pyre, and the age of the invincible airship was over almost as quickly as it had begun. If the Zeppelin shows how a cheap new idea can destroy an untouchable one, the next machine shows what happens when sheer size is mistaken for invincibility. In 1945, Japan still possessed the largest battleship ever built, a vessel so massive it has never been equaled to this day. Her name was Yamato, and she carried the biggest naval guns ever mounted on a warship, capable of hurling shells weighing more than a small car over distances of miles. She was meant to be the unbreakable heart of the Japanese fleet. But by the spring of 1945, the war had changed completely, and the giant was sent on a mission that was close to a death sentence from the start. Yamato was ordered to sail toward Okinawa with barely enough fuel to get there and almost no aircraft to protect her. American aircraft carriers found her long before she arrived. Wave after wave of dive bombers and torpedo planes attacked the lone battleship, and there was no friendly air cover to stop them. For 2 hours, the largest warship on Earth absorbed hit after hit, until at last, her own magazines exploded in a blast so enormous, it sent a mushroom cloud thousands of feet into the sky, visible for miles. The greatest battleship ever built sank before she ever reached her target. More than 3,000 men went down with her, and only a few hundred were pulled from the water alive. Her giant guns never decided a single great battle. So far, every machine on this list at least made it into action before it died. The next one could not even manage that. As the Second World War turned against Germany, its leaders dreamed of a tank so heavily armored that no enemy weapon could ever destroy it. The result was the Panzer VIII, better known as the Mouse, meaning mouse, a name that was almost a cruel joke because it weighed around 188 tons. It was, and still is, the heaviest armored vehicle ever built. On paper, it was the unkillable tank, a moving fortress that nothing could stop. In reality, that very weight was its undoing. It was so heavy that it could barely cross most bridges without collapsing them, and it crawled along at a walking pace that made it an easy target. Building it consumed enormous resources at a time when Germany was running out of everything. In the end, only a tiny handful of prototypes were ever even partly completed, and not one of them ever fought in a real battle. The most invincible tank ever designed was captured and destroyed without firing a shot in combat. It was a fortress that existed mostly as a fantasy. The Mouse was an invincible machine that never fought. The next one is stranger still, because it became a legend on the battlefield and was still, again and again, destroyed by its own side. The German Tiger tank earned a reputation during the war that bordered on myth. With its thick armor and its deadly main gun, enemy crews were genuinely terrified of it, and stories spread that it was nearly unstoppable in a straight fight. But the Tiger hid a fatal weakness that had nothing to do with the enemy. It was a mechanical nightmare. It was extraordinarily complex. It broke down constantly, and when it did, it was so heavy and so difficult to tow that recovering it from the battlefield was often impossible. Time after time, a Tiger crew whose tank had simply failed, a broken transmission, a jammed set of road wheels, a dead engine, would be forced to abandon their priceless machine. And to keep it from falling into enemy hands, they would destroy it themselves, setting demolition charges on the very tank that was supposed to be invincible. A startling share of all the Tigers lost in the war were never knocked out by enemy guns at all. They were killed by their own gearboxes and finished off by their own crews. The legend was real. So was the breakdown truck. If the Tiger proved that complexity could kill a legend, the next weapon proved that size alone could make a machine almost pointless. Germany built the largest gun ever fired in the history of warfare, a monster called Schwerer Gustaf. Its barrel was so wide, a grown man could climb inside it, firing shells that weighed several tons each. It was meant to be an unstoppable siege weapon, able to smash any fortress on Earth. But to call it impractical does not begin to cover it. The gun was so enormous that it had to be transported in pieces by railway and assembled on site, a process that took days and required a small army. Operating it needed a crew of around 250 men, with thousands more for security and support. And after all that effort, it was used in only a single major siege, where it fired a few dozen shells, and then it sat as a giant, slow, nearly useless target. When the war began closing in, the Germans blew up their own supergun to keep the Allies from capturing it. The most powerful artillery piece ever made spent almost its entire existence being assembled, guarded, and ultimately destroyed by the very people who built it. That brings us to the final machine, and to the ghost that has been hanging over this entire list. The Bismarck had a sister, an almost identical battleship just as powerful and just as feared. Her name was Tirpitz. After watching the Bismarck sink on her first voyage, German command made a fateful decision. They would not risk Tirpitz the same way. Instead, they hid her in the deep, narrow fjords of Norway, where she sat like a coiled threat, forcing the Allies to keep huge forces on guard just in case she ever came out. For years, she barely fired a shot at an enemy ship. She was one of the most powerful warships ever built, reduced to hiding in the mountains. And the Allies refused to leave her alone. They attacked her with daring midget submarines that crept into the fjord, and again with bombers, until finally British aircraft arrived carrying enormous bombs designed to smash through the thickest armor. Those bombs found her at anchor, set off an explosion inside her, and rolled the great battleship completely over. Around 1,000 men were trapped and died inside the capsized hull. Tirpitz, the sister of the unsinkable Bismarck, spent almost the entire war hiding from a fight, and was destroyed in the end without ever winning one. That is the thread that connects every machine in this story, from a battleship that vanished in 3 minutes, to a supergun that fired only a handful of times before its own crew blew it apart. Each one was sold as invincible. Each one was the pride of a nation, the weapon the enemy was told to fear above all others. And each one was undone, not by magic, but by a torpedo from an old biplane, by a new kind of bullet, by a swarm of small aircraft, by its own weight, by its own engine, or by the simple decision to hide it away until the enemy came to finish it. The word unkillable did not protect a single one of them. If anything, it doomed them, because believing a machine cannot die is the surest way to send it to an early grave. The mighty Hood, the Bismarck, the great Zeppelins, the Yamato, the Mouse, the Tiger, the Gustaf, and the Tirpitz all share the same lesson written in steel and fire. Nothing built by human hands is ever truly invincible, and the louder you insist that it is, the more spectacular its destruction tends to be. If you found this fascinating, hit subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of story we tell here. The real verdict on the machine's history would rather forget. I will see you in the next one.